Swaminathan Aiyar joins in here in the studio as well. Swami, this is your show. We need your verdict. Has the big reset happened, or has the government frittered the opportunity?
It definitely not happened. As I said, this is like a Chidambaram budget with some saffron lipstick added. And may I say, Chidambaram himself has issued a statement saying, "Vare vah, you guys have taken everything from me." And even added snidely, you know, when I suggested 49% cap on insurance, you guys opposed it. Now you yourself are proposing it in this particular budget. You're going along with all my fiscal targets. So Chidambaram is having a nice little laugh, saying that, you know, I've been vindicated. What does this, I mean, the defense taken by Arun Jaitley, I think, is I have only had 45 days. I need a lot more time. Some people will say, excuse me, what were you doing all these days when you were expecting to win? And after all, there was an interim budget, right? So you had many, many months to look at those data and think, why is it you didn't even address the issue till 45 days? It's possible to take a charitable view and say, okay, give them more time. I will simply say that I think politically, this was an opportunity to say, here is my vision for 5 years. You didn't have to go into individual data. You just said, this is the reform I'm going to do, this is the reform I'm going to do, this is the reform I'm going to do. Remember Manmohan Singh in 1991. The budget was not just about the figures for that fiscal year. There was a longer term vision. So Mr. Jaitley could have said, what is your vision, long-term vision? Will you bring your direct tax rates down to ASEAN levels, as proposed in the economic survey? Will you denationalize coal? Will you have a new vision of public sector banks where you might have equity falling below 51%, as Yashwant Sinha himself had said? Will you have a major change in the land acquisition issue, which has held up everything? Will you have a major change in the subsidies issue? I mean, having talked about tough budget and having talked about bitter medicine, at the end of it all, this really looks as though, you know, there was this big balloon and puss, the gas has got out of it, and you say, excuse me, I need a little more time. Okay, he will get more time. He has a second chance. But I will simply say at this point of time, the chance of having a big visionary budget, a big thing saying, look, I have arrived here and we are going to change all things. I can't give you all the details, but we are going to change it all. No, we have not seen that. And that, I think, is a disappointment.
That is a disappointment, and that's a disappointed verdict from Swaminathan Aiyar. Let's take it across to the Finance Secretary, one of the architects of the budget exercise, Dr. Mayaram, who joins us live right here on Business Tonight. We appreciate very much you being with us. This isn't a big bang budget that people were expecting. There was a truckload of expectation against this budget, point taken, but this hasn't really met expectations. It's more of the same, if we may. How would you defend your position?
I think it's a question of crisis of expectations, which means that if you pitch your expectations very, very high, then you are bound to be disappointed. If you are realistic, if you understand political economy in a democratic setup with very diverse interests that need to be addressed, and then still a very strong movement forward and a very strong indication for reform. There are a very large number of people who think that this has been a very good budget. So it's a question of where you are looking from. And I think if academically one was to discuss and say all subsidies should be scrapped and all restrictions should go, all public sector undertakings should be privatized, that can be a point of view. But obviously, the decisions in the government are not taken in this manner. But if you look at the direction is very clear, which means there is no let up on fiscal consolidation. If you recall, in the last 2 months, there have been articles, a spate of articles by eminent economists who said, it's not necessary to stick to fiscal consolidation path. The fiscal deficit can be 5.6 or 5.7%. And the government should move towards spending more money to get the growth back on track. However, there is now a wide acceptance for the fact that if the government is profligate, then it has other serious consequences, and therefore you have to move towards fiscal consolidation. So there is a determination which has been reiterated again and again, and then again in this budget, that we will move towards fiscal consolidation. There is very clear indication that reforms are on the way. This is the first step, and therefore moving forward you can see many more reforms which will come. It is not just in the budget that they come, but they will also come during the year. So I think there is a need for much greater introspection on how high we should pitch expectations when we believe that with a magic wand all the problems of the country will be swept aside in one go, and bingo, there would be a great ideal budget there.
Mr. Mayaram, I do agree that there's no magic wand. At the same time, to say that, in a democracy we have to listen to so many different voices, up to a point that's true. It does not mean, therefore, that you cannot make clear choices. I mean, we've had a situation where in many budgets, many finance ministers have said, look at the number of exemptions and exceptions. Instead of having, uniformity of taxation, you keep saying, because of this lobby, I'm going to change this. Because of this lobby, either you have a little more or a little less tax. There are so many different areas where they have fiddled around with the tax rates. The idea of any uniformity has given way to complete discretion on, if I like it, I give you a little more, and if I don't like it, I give a little less. The notion of the principle of uniformity of taxation seems to have given way to arbitrary taxation depending on which lobby has carried favor with the finance minister. So, I mean, in terms of in any democracy, it is not necessary to go that route. It is possible to reduce the number of exemptions and exceptions. In this particular case, the number has been increased. Beyond that, I mean, you're right in saying that it is possible for a number of reforms to be announced later on. But surely some directions could have been given in this budget. Please.
No, but I think that your contention that the tax exemptions only cater to interests, I think is erroneous. If you look at for instance, indirect taxes, a very detailed examination has been done on inversion of taxes which impact manufacturing in the country. And they have been corrected in many areas, many areas, and you would see the reflection in the times to come when the manufacturing in India would become more profitable. For instance, look at electronics, which is a very important area. We have been importing electronic goods worth $60 billion, and the manufacturing in India has gone down significantly. Now, there have been corrections in the import duties to ensure that the finished goods do not become cheaper than the components, which was the case in the earlier. So I think there is much greater method in what you seem to perceive as madness, and there is great thinking which has gone into how the budget should be crafted or designed. And I would also say that when you are talking about the fact that we could have made major decisions in this area, look at FDI and defense, for instance. For how many years this has been pending? We have been importing defense equipment from abroad. We commit a large sum of foreign exchange for importing these, but we had not been allowing manufacturing or defense equipment in India. Now, very well you could say, why not 100%? Why 49%? Well, we have seen in the last 20 years, ever since 1991, that changes have been incremental. But there have always been times when that incremental change has been exponentially greater than what it has been in the past several years. So look at insurance. There is also now a very clear understanding insurance should go up to 49%, which has been the general demand for all these years of insurance companies from overseas. So you would see there are very clear indications of very strong reforms in this budget. And to my mind, I think if you look at them carefully, you would find there is merit in what I am saying.
Right. There is method to this madness, says Dr. Arvind Mayaram. Let's take it across to Harish Salve as well, who joins in live from London. Mr. Salve, I'm sure you will bring in a different perspective. Sitting in London, how are you viewing this budget? Would you agree with Swami that it's an opportunity lost, or would you agree with Dr. Mayaram and with what the finance minister himself has said, that given the time constraint, the fact that he had only 45 days, this is the best that they could have done, and in that sense, it's a more practical budget. What is your view?
See, I've seen the figures very quickly, and I completely empathize with the finance minister when he says he didn't have too much elbow room. If you hear what Mr. Mayaram said, this is a view which some of us have held for a very long time, and that is that the budget exercise in India is overrated. The budget is a very small, is an important but a part of a overall process by which the government has to kickstart the economy. If you read the budget speech, Mr. Jaitley has ticked off a very large number of boxes, which he has rightly spotted as hindering growth. Now, in a manner of speaking, Mr. Chidambaram is right. It is pretty much a budget which could have come from Mr. Chidambaram. Why did everybody scoff that budget? They scoffed that budget because that government had a track record of bringing growth down, of jamming projects, and of bringing a situation of policy paralysis. If this government can deliver on the governance front, the figures which looked unbelievable at the hands of the UPA government may become credible in the hands of the current government. So it's all a question of having a larger debate beyond the figures of this budget on what are you going to do to the real constraints on growth? What are you going to do to the trust deficit? And I don't want to comment on the retrospective amendment beyond saying that what has been done has not removed the trust deficit. What are you going to do to the feeling that India is a very difficult place to do business? Now, that is obviously something which cannot be addressed in a budget, but that is what constrains foreign investment. What are you going to do to the impression that the income tax department is assessee unfriendly? That cannot be removed. In fact, some of the changes again have removed a few tax tribunal decisions and went in favor of the assessee. Now, the overall impression that the Indian tax department, the finance minister has rightly said that they have to be facilitators, not interrogators. How is that going to be achieved? What are you going to do to land acquisition?
Right.
What are you going to do to labor reform? These are key constraints in growth. How are you going to deal with the environmental problem, which has become one of the major stumbling blocks of all projects moving forward? How are you going to deal with the problem of allocation of mines? How are you going to improve production of coal? Now, I understand none of this possibly is the subject matter of a budget. But when we are assuming a 17% growth in revenues, these are the issues which need to be deliberated. These are the issues which need to be discussed. And I think our debate must go wider than the budget. We must, and I'm sure the government will unfold what it wants to do to improve the overall economic and business condition of India, which will help them achieve the figure that they have projected in this budget.
Fair point indeed, Mr. Salve, but I know you don't want to comment specifically on one case, but as a lawyer, you've been on the receiving side of this whole retrospective tax tussle that the government of India and India Inc. has had at one level, or in fact global MNCs have had. I know you say you're disappointed because this was just a statement of intent. What would you have expected the finance minister to do? Could he have gone out there and repealed that retrospective tax completely, even though there are ongoing litigations? Because this very clearly says that there will be perhaps no fresh cases issued. I'm going to get Dr. Mayaram on this. But as far as the ongoing litigations are concerned, they will continue.
Supriya, I would not like to comment on this because I'm very much involved in the quote-unquote ongoing litigations. So I don't want to comment on this, and it's something which affects the interests of my clients, and on a public debate, I don't want to say anything about this.
But let's get in Dr. Mayaram's view. Dr. Mayaram, you know, the expectation, at least in the market, was that the government would go ahead and undo the damage caused by the retrospective tax, especially given the kind of commentary that we've seen from the finance minister himself over the last couple of months, even before this government came to power. Why do you think that the government falls short of, of scrapping the retrospective aspect? Is there a legal element here? Help us understand, why did the government not go ahead and actually scrap the retrospective tax?
I think what you're talking about, the tax provision that deals with indirect transfers, I think that is what you're talking about, because retrospective taxation is done on a routine manner to address technical issues in almost every budget, and therefore I don't see so therefore the question is, why are we speaking of a specific case? the issue came up on account of the fact that some past, a fresh demand is made on liability which is from the past. That is basically what we are saying here. Now the point here is that the retrospective act was interpreted in a particular manner in the past, and people had also paid taxes. In one particular case they went up, and it was determined by the courts that perhaps that interpretation was not correct. So therefore the parliament corrected that interpretation to that extent, which means that in the future the law pertaining to indirect transfers is now clarified, and there will be taxation in this kind of indirect transfers in the future. Now the question before us is only about those indirect transfers that took place in the past, and in such cases where these taxes had not been paid, because in many cases indirect transfers took place, the tax authorities interpreted it as taxable and people paid the tax and did not challenge it. So we are talking of very limited number of cases where the tax was not paid and it has been challenged. Finance Minister has very clearly stated that because they are in various stages of dispute resolution, whether in the courts or under arbitration, etc., there is a moral hazard in interfering in the process at this point of time. Therefore, they will reach their logical conclusion as they will. As far as opening of cases of past where such taxes were not imposed or were not paid, he has very clearly said that a high-level committee will look at it, and this will go through a very rigorous examination before any such fresh cases are opened, to provide enough comfort to the investors that there will be no unnecessary harassment of anybody on this count. I think to that extent the investors understand this, and this is going to give them the kind of comfort they require without causing further legal complications by tinkering with the law at this stage.
All right, not tinkering with the law at this stage. It is meant to give comfort to investors. Swami, do you believe Mr. Jaitley should have just made it prospective and that would have given comfort? Is this giving you comfort? This statement of intent, we are not going to use it, but this is going to stay looming large somewhere in the background. We may go back to it.
I think it's a question of what was the words that you chose. He could have said, it's unfortunate this has happened, but whatever has happened in the past, let it go through the courts. But in the future, only in the rarest of rarest cases would I like to see this go through. As a norm, it should not be there. I mean, this kind of categorical statement would have given comfort. The actual way he has put it, I agree with Harish Salve, the trust deficit will continue. Because his really emphasis is, no, you see, Parliament is sovereign, it has the absolute right to do it. I mean, that seems to be the emphasis, rather than saying, this should only happen in the rarest of rare cases. And it's a bad thing that it happened in the past. That would have been the right formulation.
Right. I think Mr. Salve has a point there, and we'd like to go across to him right there in London. Mr. Salve?
I want to set the record straight. The indirect transfer was never taxed before Vodafone. Never. In the pre-Vodafone era, a large number of companies exited when they sold to Hutchison SR. They were not taxed. Vodafone case was started as a test case by the income tax department. That was an admitted position, that it was a test case. There is no dispute that at times where people have paid taxes on indirect transfer and the court upsets an existing state of law, you have a retrospective amendment. The Supreme Court repeatedly asked the government to show their past practice of taxing indirect transfers. The honest answer was, we haven't done it before, but then such big transactions have not happened before. Fair enough. So I just wanted to set the record straight. The indirect transfer retrospective provision is not to save people who have already paid tax from claiming it back. It was done purely to revalidate a demand which had been raised in the first of its kind test case. I just wanted to set the record straight on that.
Point taken, but let's move this debate beyond retrospective tax and beyond the Vodafone case, which is just one instance. There's far more to talk about in this budget. Dr. Mayaram, a quick comment from you on the 4.1% target. Help us understand, the thinking there in the finance ministry. You were there when the previous finance minister set that target of 4.1%, which many doubted the credibility of that target. We had a chance to catch up with rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch, and all of them are still a little skeptical on the government's ability to meet that target. How hopeful are you that given the fact that we're looking at a possibly poor monsoon, that there will be pressure on the subsidy front as well? How confident are you that we'll get to that 4.1% target?
It is in the DNA of the rating agencies to be skeptical, because they were similarly skeptical last time in the last year's budget, and they were skeptical also about the fiscal deficit numbers in the year before that. So I would say that their skepticism comes from, I think, their DNA. They ought to be skeptical because they are credit rating agencies after all. So I don't go so much by what they are saying at the moment. They will come and discuss with us and we will give them the numbers, and I am assured that they will be fully convinced by the numbers that we give to them when they come and meet us during the course of the year. But as far as 4.1% is concerned, we are looking at two parts. One is in terms of the taxes. Now, tax to GDP ratio last year was 10.1%. This was on a growth rate of 4.7%. This year we are projecting our growth rate to be close to say 5.6, 5.7%. And on that we have projected a tax to GDP ratio of 10.6%. So I think to that extent the numbers are credible, and we stand by them, and we believe that that kind of growth will be achieved. The other comes from the non-tax revenues. The non-tax revenues comprise of dividends and of divestments and so on. Now our divestment target, now everyone believes that we may be able to better the divestment targets than what we have put in the budget, on account of the fact that the markets are really buoyant, and therefore the receivables can be much higher than what we have projected in terms of the sales of the shares and so on. We also believe that going forward this year, and we are seeing this from the order books of the PSUs, that the profits will be higher than what was anticipated earlier, and therefore we also expect higher dividends to come this year. So in that sense, our non-tax revenue figures are also quite credible. I am not going in the individual numbers at the moment because I don't think we'll have time for that, but these numbers are very well there in the budget papers, and they match up in that sense. So I think going forward, although as the finance minister has said, there are headwinds. For instance, there are headwinds with regard to monsoon. There is also the problem of Iraq and now the Middle East, which can impact the oil prices. But on balance, I believe that as of now, we believe that we will be able to stick to 4.1% as a target.
Right, fair point indeed. And while you're talking about skeptical DNAs, let's get in Swaminathan Aiyar. This entire projection, this entire assumption is happening on a growth rate of 5.9%. Way too ambitious?
Let me say, I am not a rating agency, but I also have skepticism in my DNA. and I don't think I'm alone. Yes, I think the target is ambitious. Not only ambitious, it's very ambitious. The fact is that world growth was expected to pick up quite a bit. There were some very optimistic projections from the IMF and the World Bank. More recently, the World Bank has scaled down its global growth target for the current financial year and scaled down its own projections for India from 6.2 to 5.6, if I remember right. So, things are not as buoyant as we had been led to believe in February when Mr. Chidambaram presented his budget. So I would say the global scene is somewhat down. Beyond that, there is the question of the drought, which Mr. Mayaram mentioned, and the Middle East. On there, while I'm normally skeptical on this particular thing, I will say we must not overdo the skepticism, because while June was a terrible month for rainfall, so far the July prospects don't look too bad. So while we'll have a subnormal monsoon, maybe it will not be a drought. So, perhaps we shouldn't take that too far amiss. Secondly, I think after the initial worries about what's going to happen in Iraq, the fact that the southern oil fields are safe, the price of Brent today came down to 108. So, far from the price of oil going out of control, there is some signs of some kind of return to normalcy. In Libya, some rebel groups have said we are going to resume export of oil. So, all is not negative on the global front. But nevertheless, I would say that, 5 to 5.5 would have been a more realistic range than what we have seen in the budget. And it seems to me that will have consequences for the revenue. It still seems to me the assumption that revenue, Mr. Mayaram has said that the ratio of tax to GDP will go up merely because growth is faster. Frankly, that doesn't follow. Right? It doesn't follow at all. Especially it doesn't follow when you have given up a large number of taxes. Sure. You have given up 22,500 and clawed back only 7,500. Sure. So it is not that, there is a natural inbuilt buoyancy of this kind of acceleration. Right. So it seems to me that you are projecting a growth of revenue that is much faster than the growth of GDP. If you are very lucky, that may come about, but it doesn't seem obvious. So to somebody with any kind of skepticism in his DNA like me, I have to say, whoa,
Dr. Mayaram, comment on that. Swami says you're projecting a growth of revenue that's much higher than the growth of GDP, and also the fact that you haven't quite factored in a poor monsoon and the crisis in Iraq in your budget arithmetic. While you're conscious of the fact that it could derail your your projections, it hasn't been factored in.
Yeah, the answer to that question is already given by Swami himself. That Brent prices have come down. We have factored the oil prices $110 per barrel. They have come down to 108. We had factored a rupee to be at 60 60 rupee to a dollar. The rupee is now around 59. And it has been hovering between 58 and 59. So these are also numbers which are not part of the budget, but which would have a positive impact on our deficit. So I think, as I said, on balance, we need to wait a while to see how it moves. But as of today, I think I am confident that at the end of it, we will be able to meet this target.
They often say that fortune favors the brave, and we wish you all the very best with that. We really appreciate you taking time off this evening and joining us right here on ET Now on The Verdict with Swami.